G'day, Mike here, and welcome to Module 9 of our Data Studio course. And this is where we're going to get to some of the funkiest stuff, so date and filter controls. Why are these important? Because it's great to be able to filter our data. As Avinash has said before, all data in aggregate is crap. So we need to be able to then slice and dice our data to be able to say, well, what is happening just with mobile? Or what's happening just in Australia? Or insert segment here. So when we start to segment our data, that's when things start to work, and the filter is how we're going to do that. And the wonderful thing about Data Studio is that it is so interactive, is that your client or whoever is looking at the dashboard can slice and dice the data on the fly, which is obviously very different to handing them a PDF, which is a historical document, which is saying this happened and that's it. You just get to look at that piece of data. So there's two ways that you're going to do this. There's the date picker and the filter. Now there's another little thing. There's another filter later on, which I'll show you in just a second. But date picker and filter. Remember when we looked at our tour through the interface, these were two icons over here. At the end of the list of charts and after all of the shapes and images, we get the date and the filter icon, the little calendar and the three little lines that you can see there. The date is going to be added probably, you may not, if you're assuming you're having some sort of cover page, you're probably going to add the date top right on page 2. And generally speaking, you want that to affect all pages in the report, but you can override that. You can have a specific page with a different date range if you so choose. So I've used this example, I think, in a previous module, but for the most part, we'll put that date there and we'll have the default date range either be last 30 days or last month. Often for reporting purposes, that'll be set to last month. So the data on every page of the report is then set to last month. But if I've got a page on there that's comparing, if I wanted to show the data for the last few months, so very similar to if you're going to the Dimensions tab, time by month, and you might want to show, say, the last 12 months, then for that page in the report, I'll use a different time frame and I'll overwrite the time frame that's being used across the rest of the report. So very, very easy to do in Data Studio, but by default, that will affect everything in the report, and you get to choose the default date range just underneath. So you literally click on the calendar icon, draw in where you want it to go, and then choose that default date range in the date range properties thing over on the right hand side. Now the filter control, now I found this obviously particularly useful for your analytics data. There is some use cases. Device is probably the most obvious one for your AdWords data, but once you start diving in to analytics data, it gets a whole lot better. I've linked here to a 4-minute Google video that explains this in a bit more detail if you want. And if you do a search or find in the resources the Lunametrics analytics template, their dashboard has got a whole bunch of filters added down the right hand side, which is a really good place to start. Grab a copy of their dashboard and start playing with the various filters on there. You can't see it here, but when you're in view mode, next to each of those dimensions, so next to the words desktop, mobile and tablet, as you hover over them, you'll see a tiny little grey only over on the right hand side, and that's a quick way to show just that segment. So for instance, if you only wanted to show tablet, you could untick desktop and mobile, or you hover over tablet, go over to the right hand side there and click on only. It will remove all but that particular dimension. Obviously, if there's only 3, it's not a big deal, but when you've got a list of 15 there, it's quite handy to be able to hover over that and say only traffic in the United States and show me all of the data for that. Now that's the properties. So data source, the dimension, the cost there, the metric part there is just going to show you. So let's assume we had computers and tablets and mobile in our device there. if you wanted some sort of metric next to those to give you some context, so for instance, you might want to see the cost as I've shown here, or you might want to see the number of conversions, just to give you that context of, as I go to do that segment, if I see that tablet has only spent $2, but mobile and desktop have each spent around $20,000 for the date range I'm looking at, then I know not to pay much attention to that tablet traffic, or maybe it's going to have a super high conversion rate or a super low conversion rate. But that just having that little number next to it gives me that little bit of context before I filter to say, probably not worth doing this, or I can just ignore this from my report. And you can choose underneath metric there, you can choose whether or not to show those values. So by default, you're sorting by that metric, and then you can choose whether or not to show those values next to the name of the dimension. And then right down at the bottom of your properties, I don't know what it's called, the thing over on the right hand side where you've got all of your properties, this thing that we were looking over here where it says properties, data and style, right down at the bottom of that list, for almost all of your charts you have this option to filter the data. You can see here I've been looking at a scorecard because it says scorecard filter. So I've got a scorecard highlighted on my dashboard over on the left somewhere, and then over bottom right down the thing, this is now the filter for individual components. So for instance, I'm explaining this, but I can now choose to filter the data that component displays. So let's say I've got a scorecard there, which is a single number. I can create a filter like this that says just include campaigns that contain the word brand. And up just above that rule, you'll see I've given that a name and I've confirmed which data source that's coming from. So I've called that my brand campaign filter. Once I've created that filter once, I get to use it on all of the different pages inside of my dashboard. I do have to go and apply it, but now I can go and very easily apply that to a chart on this page and a time series chart there and a scorecard metric on the next page and so on. But you do have to set these filters up the first time you go and create this dashboard for that particular data source. The only downside with this right now, as I record this in May 2017, you can't do this based on label. So label is not a dimension that you're able to pull in with your data source. So you may need to, if you want to do filters like this, you might need to rename some of your campaigns just so that they've got the appropriate word in there or code or number or something that you're going to use in order to be able to filter them inside of Data Studio. Would love them to include labels at a later date. We'll just have to wait and see if that happens.